Hi, I'm Ellen from the Chili Dog, and today I have a confession to make. I've been knitting for a few decades now, and in my early knitting years, I never knit a swatch and I never checked my gauge. I'd find a pattern I liked, head to the big box store, grab some yarn that I figured would probably work. I got needles that were the same size as the pattern said, and then I'd head home and just start knitting. When I finished a project, I always felt nervous about what was going to happen that first time I washed it. And there was good reason for that. Some of my projects were unusable after the first wash because they'd shrink, or they would stretch, or they would felt, or it would turn out that my gauge was very different from what was indicated in the pattern, and my garment would be sized completely wrong. Now, as a designer, I swatch a lot, and I was thinking about this topic as I was working on the design for my Wallflower sweater. As a designer, I swatch to test different stitch patterns in the yarn I'm using to see if it's something that's going to work and that I like for what I'm making. I also swatch increases and decreases to see how they're going to affect the shaping in my design. I swatch and try out different edgings and borders to see how they roll or how they're going to work. And of course, I swatch to see how a yarn is going to behave after washing and or blocking. Because the pattern gauge given in a design, even though it may not say so, is almost always the gauge after your fabric has been washed or blocked. These are things I didn't know as an early knitter, so today I'd like to take a few minutes to talk about the importance of swatching. Let me give you an overview about what a swatch is, some factors to consider when you're knitting a swatch, and reasons why you should be swatching. A swatch is really just a small sample of knitting that helps you predict what your finished fabric or your finished project is going to look like so you don't have any unexpected surprises later. It's almost as if you could magically just pop a small piece out of that larger item to study the characteristics of the fabric. In sports, they say that you should practice like you play. In knitting, you should swatch like you knit. To ensure this swatch is really a good predictor of the finished fabric, it's important to knit with the same materials and the same tools under the same conditions in the same methods that you're going to use to knit the final project. Once your swatch has been knit, it's time to wash it or block it in the same way that you're going to care for your finished item. And that may mean machine washing and drying it, or machine washing it and laying it flat to dry. Or if you're knitting something lacy, it could even mean hand washing your swatch and then stretching it into shape and pin blocking it to enhance that lace pattern. However you're going to care for your finished item is how you should care for your swatch. Once you're done with that, it's time to take a look at your fabric and check your gauge. Because remember, even though it's not specifically said in a pattern, pattern gauge is given after washing and blocking. When you're looking at your swatch, you may decide a couple of things. Hopefully your fabric is perfect. You love the look and feel of it, you matched your pattern gauge perfectly, and you can just go ahead and start knitting your project. More likely than not, you may need to make some adjustments either to your fabric or adjustments to the pattern. If you're not happy with the fabric, if it's too loose or too tight and you don't like the look or feel of it, that means that you're probably going to need to change your needle size or your needle material or some other factor that went into the creation of the swatch. And then swatch again, wash it and block it again, and then take another look at your fabric. If you like the fabric, but you didn't match the gauge perfectly, at that point, you're going to need to make some sort of mathematical adjustments to the knitting pattern. Now for some reasons to swatch. Of course, the biggie is to see how your fabric is going to behave after washing and blocking and to check that gauge so you don't get any unexpected surprises later. But you can also use swatching as a way to practice an unfamiliar stitch in small scale before you take it into your larger design. At its very simplest, swatching is just an opportunity to take your yarn and needles out for a test drive before committing to a large project so you don't have any unexpected surprises later. Sometimes in a pattern you'll see a note that says, take time to save time, check your gauge. I prefer to think of that as take time to ensure success by swatching your fabric. It may initially feel like a waste of time and materials, but isn't it better to make adjustments when you're working a few small squares than spending weeks on something like a sweater and ending up with an unwearable garment? I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about swatching. If you did, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and share it with your friends. And if you have a funny swatching story, feel free to confess your sins in the comments below. Until we stitch again, happy knitting!